Alright, hello everyone, Simon here, and welcome back to our ARCHMINE100 series where we are learning architectural concepts through Minecraft. So we are all the way in the 10th week already with our 10th lecture, Monumentality, where we are basically going to look at pictures of big buildings and that's it. Well, we're going to talk about them, of course. So let's talk about monuments. Before we even go on with the Stonehenge, the concept of monuments is, well, first of all, they're big, important buildings. Big and important, that's monumental. But they also tend to have some special meaning. I mean, not just big, but some kind of spiritual or cultural or philosophical meaning. So not just physically large, but also culturally important, I think. That's the criteria for what we consider to be monuments. I mean, just a skyscraper is big, but not necessarily a monument because it doesn't memorialize anything, it doesn't celebrate anything in particular, except maybe, I don't know, business and money. But even that's like, it's too practical, right? So the idea of a monument is something with meaning. So when people talk about architecture, they usually think about the monuments because they're the most important pieces of architecture in human history. But of course, I've left this at the very end of the series because I just wanted to make sure you understand that a lot of architecture is not the most important stuff. Like, we're just going to save the best for last, basically. But there's a lot of other stuff out there that's also important that you need to know about. So let's go on with our list of monuments. We start off with the Stonehenge, one of the more primitive monuments in the world. That's the picture of it there. Mostly it's stones, kind of stood up, right? And then with a little bit of stone on top as well, so they're kind of like a gateways or arches arranged in a circle. So the Stonehenge was erected between 3000 BC and 2000 BC. Unfortunately, there's no person in that picture for scale. That's a bit of a shame, actually. A bit of scale would be useful. I think you can't actually go to the Stonehenge anymore because they're trying to make sure people don't vandalize or disturb the site too much. So I think now you can kind of look at it from a distance, so you can't actually go underneath it and touch it because they don't want people touching it. Because it was built so long ago, no records exist as to the precise history and purpose of the monument. So this thing was built long before there was writing in the south of England, so we don't actually know what they did there. But we do find numerous graves dating back to 8000 BC, suggesting links to funerary rites, so funerals and dead people, and perhaps even healing, or religious kind of ideas about healing. Their medicine and their technology about medicine weren't that great back in 3000 BC. Also, although the Stonehenge itself was erected, sometime after 3000 BC, there are other things in the location that suggest that the site was used, as we said, dating back to 8000 BC. So the Stonehenge is really the only most durable remains of a much larger complex in that area. And just the Stonehenge itself, certain stones align with significant astronomical phenomena like sunrises and sunsets at equinoxes and solstices, and they align with the sun and certain stars, I think. So it serves as a astronomical observatory of sorts, or at least the stones mark important dates during the year. And also in the graves in the surrounding area, there's evidence that there's people traveling here from all over Europe to die and be buried at this location, which is interesting. So we have certain remains that we know about, but we don't really know the true story about what these stones are about. Oh, and also some of these stones sing, quote unquote, they sing. What they mean by that is that if you strike them, they make a certain sound because of their size and the way they're placed, and because of the type of stone they are. So, and we also know that in certain cultures, certain kind of singing stones are associated with healing as well. So maybe sick people came here to seek some kind of miracle cure, and then they don't get cured, so they die here, so they get buried here, and that would explain all the graves in the area. We don't know for sure, but obviously, something was important about this place. At least the people believed that there was something important about this place. Otherwise, like, why would they go to the trouble of putting these stones here, right? These stones are not local, they're dragged here from a long distance away. And obviously they're not easy to stand upright, and especially not easy to put the horizontal ones on top of the vertical ones as well. So yes, unfortunately, we don't know exactly what these are about, but it's definitely a monument. The next example we have is the Great Wall of China. I guess it doesn't really fit the monument definition that I just set out earlier, in the sense that there's no real meaning behind the wall. It's really just a wall. It's a pretty practical kind of structure. So the Great Wall is a series of fortifications in the north of China built between 200 BC and the 14th century AD. So it's not just one, I mean, in the picture there's one wall, but the whole series is not just one wall built at one time. So the idea of building walls in the north of China goes back many centuries, and they continuously build different walls over the years. Wall construction occurred on and off over the centuries at different locations depending on territorial boundaries at the time. So, over time the boundaries of China changed as they grew more or less powerful relative to their northern neighbors, and the walls would be placed accordingly. The walls are actually insufficient to stop determined invasion. So, I mean, they're a wall, but they're not tall enough or thick enough or well guarded enough to actually stop a full-on invasion. But what they did do was deter small raids and slow down the attackers. And additionally, the watchtowers and the signal fires that were placed along the length of the wall would prevent sneak attacks and give times for garrisons to respond. So if you want to climb over the wall, you could. It's not too difficult to climb over the wall. But imagine if you are, on horseback, it'll be very difficult to carry your horse over the walls, for example. So then, once you're on the other side of the wall, but you leave your horses behind, then you're on foot, so you're slower. Also, there are a few guards along the wall, and they'll see you coming, and they'll light the signal fires, which then tell the nearby garrisons that you arrived. So the wall won't actually stop you if you want to come in, but they'll alert the guards, and they'll make it more difficult for you to actually do whatever it is you want to do. So it gets in the way of invasions. It doesn't actually stop invasions as such, but it gets in the way and makes it difficult, or makes it more difficult to invade China. In terms of monuments and some kind of cultural significance to this, I guess the fact that the walls were built on and off for so many centuries is a reflection of the Chinese philosophy, I guess, of kind of walling off people you don't like instead of actually attacking them, but trying to defend the home territories. China has, it has grown and shrunk over the years, but it has not really kind of expanded in the way that the European powers have expanded into colonial empires around the world, or even Russia, expanding eastward from Moscow all the way to the Pacific Ocean. So the Europeans kind of really were into massive expansions in certain times in their history, and China never really got involved in any of that throughout its entire history. So it's China, like, culturally, they're more kind of conservative and defensive rather than expansive. And I guess the walls represent that. Like, instead of just kind of striking outwards to kind of conquer other territories, you just kind of build a wall and hope they don't climb over it. So that's the Wall of China, and I guess so it does have cultural significance and historical significance, but it's also a very practical structure. Myths about it being visible from the moon is completely fake. It's not even visible from the orbit unless the light conditions are very favorable. So during like sunrise or sunset, when the sun is kind of low in the sky and you cast a large shadow with the wall, then maybe you can kind of see it from orbit, but it's very difficult to see actually. Moving on to Greece, this is the Parthenon in Athens. We've seen this picture before, early on in the series of lectures, but let's look at it in more detail. This is the Parthenon located on the Athens Acropolis, built between 447 BC and 432 BC. The Athens Acropolis is like a fortress but the top of it has been filled with temples. So it turned from like a fortress into a temple complex, which maybe really is the same thing if you consider that at the time, religion and politics were pretty intertwined in ancient Greece. The temple itself is dedicated to Athena, which is the patron goddess of Athens, unsurprisingly, Athens, Athena. Built when the Athenian Empire was at the height of its power with numerous tributary states around the Aegean Sea. If you don't know your Greek history, this might be a little bit difficult to imagine, but go to Wikipedia and just look up the Athenian Empire. So it wasn't huge by historical standards, not as big as the Roman Empire or even the empire under Alexander the Great. But in terms of the Greek city-states at the time, Athens was very powerful, and it had a lot of allies and tributaries and colonies in Greece, and then on the other side, on the near side of Turkey as well. And what this particular temple was not only was it the head temple of the entire Athenian Empire, but it was also the treasury of the Athenian Commonwealth, it combined politics, religion, and the economy. So all the taxes and tributes that was collected from around the empire was stored in the temple of Athens itself. It was stored in the temple to Athena. So all the money and all the politics and all the religion was just kind of one and the same thing. And I guess since they believed in the existence of the gods and they believed that the gods intervene in their politics and their lives at that time, if you build a big temple to your goddess, maybe to gain her favor, and so therefore you might do better in wars and in economies, then it would make sense to why would you invest such amounts of money in temples? Because you believe that the gods actually exist, and so they would help you if you make them happy. And that's why they built these things, I guess. Anyway, it didn't really work in the long run. The Athenian Empire doesn't exist today, and the old Parthenon is partially ruined, as you see. Although, for a time they were a very powerful city-state in their area. This here is the Angkor Wat in Cambodia, which literally translates to Temple City. It's built in the 12th century in Cambodia. I believe this is actually the single largest temple complex in the world in terms of this volume, because it's actually really large. Maybe the photo here doesn't do it enough justice. You can kind of see tiny people, but I believe this photo is only the central temple. The complex itself it's on an island with a massive kind of like a garden. So there's a temple, and then terraces, and then garden, and then walls, and then more land, and then a moat, I think, if I remember right. So if you can just go to Wikipedia and look up Angkor Wat, and you see a map of it. It's a massive complex, and this is only the center bit of it. It was originally dedicated to the Hindu god Vishnu, but it was later converted to Buddhism. So first it was Hindu, and then it was converted to Buddhism. And the whole thing is approximately 1 square meter. Approximately, it's not quite. With a wide moat surrounding concentric walls and terraces. The 5 central towers represent the mythical Mount Meru, where, according to Hindu mythology, that's where the gods lived. So again, this represents the home of the gods. So again, we were building temples as houses for gods, as the Parthenon was the home of Athena. Now this is the home of the Hindu gods. Angkor Wat is most famous for its extensive bas-relief sculptures, illustrating both Hindu and Buddhist mythology. So there's a lot of sculptures in this place. Obviously we can't see it from a distance here, but if you ever get a chance to visit it, you'll see it. Also, if you get a chance to visit it, do please be careful about what you touch. The place is kind of falling apart and lacking the money to preserve it properly, and it's also a massive complex, so it takes a lot of money to maintain. So if you're going to be a tourist, don't break the thing, please. Like don't kind of break the bas relief pieces with your hands or something stupid like that. It is an actual. I'm not just saying that. It's actually an actual problem at the site right now. I'm not just saying that for the sake of saying it. The people who are trying to take care of this ruin is having a pretty hard time finding money for it. So again, a building dedicated to gods. The next one is the Temple of Kukulcan in the Chichen Itza in Mexico. So it's located in southern Mexico, and so Chichen Itza. Am I pronouncing that right? Chichen Itza is an ancient Mayan city in Mexico, and the Temple of Kukulcan is only one of many remarkable buildings within that city. It was built between the 9th and the 12th centuries, as far as we know. Kukulcan is a god who was represented as a feathered serpent, who most likely symbolized fertility, death, and rebirth. And the interesting thing about this particular structure is that during the spring and autumn equinoxes, the afternoon sun will cast the shadow of the stepped pyramid onto the sides of the staircases, so that it created the illusion of a serpent crawling down the pyramid, which we can't see in these pictures, but apparently it's quite impressive. So if you kind of just, like during the spring and autumn equinoxes, you just kind of look at the shadow of the pyramid cast onto the staircases, and it looks like this kind of serpent kind of crawling down the staircase as the sun sets or rises. It looks like the serpent kind of crawling down the staircase, which is kind of interesting. Unfortunately, we don't know too much else about the temple. As I believe, if I remember my history right, is that Chichen Itza was partially abandoned even when the Europeans arrived. And of course, when the Spanish conquistadors came and took all the gold from the South Americans, they didn't fare very well. And eventually, this has now become a ruin. Well, not entirely ruined, but obviously it doesn't function as a city anymore. And there's not that many records as to what exactly happened here, given that the South Americans did not have written language at the time, so there's no books or passages telling us what they actually did here. But we know which god it's dedicated to, for example. So there you go, there's another monument to a god. Although, again, yeah, like the Stonehenge, we don't know exactly what kind of rituals happened here. And even with the Angkor Wat, actually, we don't know exactly what rituals happened there during the height of its power. Oh, let's go back to here. Just a little bit more history about this one. By the time the Europeans arrived, the Angkor Wat was partially abandoned. It was never fully abandoned. There was always a few Buddhist monks kind of living here. But the whatever kind of large-scale ceremonies that happened here, they ended quite a long time ago. And so, again, we don't know exactly what they did here, because unfortunately those things have been lost in time. The next building, the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul, Turkey. This is a pretty famous building in the world. Hagia Sophia, which means holy wisdom, was built in 337 AD and it's located in Istanbul in Turkey. Although when it was built, the city was known as Constantinople, and it was a Byzantine Greek structure. And so the originally this building was a Eastern Orthodox cathedral, so not Catholic cathedral, but the Eastern Orthodox Christian sect or cathedral for those guys. But when the Turks conquered Constantinople in 1435, it was converted into a mosque, partly to make sure that the soldiers didn't try to loot the place and burn it down too much. So it was converted into a mosque, partly to preserve it, and partly because it was a pretty cool building, right? After Turkey became a republic, a secular republic, it is now a museum, and fairly well preserved. It is considered the pinnacle of Byzantine architecture, and it served as the model for many important Islamic mosques built afterwards. And it's a very impressive series of domes, as you can see, and on the interior is a massive open space, which is quite impressive. I think we've seen a picture of the interior in a previous lecture. Which one was it? was the scale and proportion lecture. We saw an illustration of the interior of the Hagia Sophia. So here's the exterior of it. And fortunately, we have some people and a van in the picture at the lower right there. You can see that. So you can kind of use that van for scale. This thing is a pretty massive building. Again, a church, a building dedicated to religious purposes. This is the Taj Mahal in India. Taj Mahal translates to Crown of Palaces, which is like, the most impressive palace of all palaces. It was built between 1632 to 1653, and it's located in India. It was built by the Mughal Emperor Shah Jahan as a mausoleum for his wife Mumtaz Mahal, so it's a tomb. It's a really big and really elaborate and really beautiful tomb for a dead wife of the emperor. It is built in white marble inlaid with semi-precious stones and covered with many intricate geometric carvings, latticeworks, and calligraphy of passages from the Quran and famous Persian poetry. So you can't really see it on that picture there, or you kind of slightly see it. So the whole thing is just white, but it is covered with really intricate carvings and inlaid with semi-precious stones. So it's still mostly white, but if you kind of walk up close to it, if you ever get a chance to visit it, you can see all these intricate carvings on it. It's pretty amazing. And the thing about this is that even though it's completely white, the strong shapes uses the sun to cast shadows, and the shadows highlight the shape of the building. For example, you can see inside the arches there, the shadows cast by the archway on the wall behind it kind of really highlights the shape of the building. So even though the whole thing is white, you can see very clearly what the building looks like. It's not just a kind of a flat block, but really a really detailed and intricate and very symmetrical building. The symmetry also extends to the surrounding garden. So the mausoleum itself is only the centerpiece of a much larger complex of gardens and outer buildings. That's a really elaborate building for a tomb, although I guess people have certain beliefs about the afterlife. I mean, if you think back to the Egyptian pyramids, for example, those were tombs. I don't know. I mean, I'm pretty ambivalent about death. I mean, the person's dead. Why they're not going to care anymore about what their tomb looks like? But maybe if you care about that sort of thing, then you might do something like this with your money. So moving forward to 1889 in Paris, France, is the Eiffel Tower. It was constructed as the gateway to the 1889 World Fair. The tower is 324 meters tall, the tallest structure in the world at the time, built out of wrought iron, and it is still the tallest structure in Paris, France. Think about that. It's not that this thing is particularly tall, although it is quite tall. It's really that Paris doesn't have very many tall buildings. so it remains the tallest building in Paris. It was an early and dramatic example of the potential of metal-framed structures, and it is a precursor to the many steel-framed skyscrapers of today. So at the time, this sort of thing was a technical marvel. Like nobody did this before. As we said, it's the biggest building at the time. And it clearly demonstrated the potential of steel-framed architecture to reach heights that stone buildings and concrete buildings couldn't do. And obviously a lot of skyscrapers these days are steel-framed. But this kind of demonstration was really signaled the beginning of the age of skyscrapers. It's a demonstration and celebration of technology, as opposed to religion in earlier monuments. And remember, up until now, mostly the monuments were about religion, except for the Great Wall of China. But all the other ones were either gods or funerary structures. But this one was just a pure celebration of technology. Like, we can build tall buildings. Check it out. We built an Eiffel Tower. So it's only about technology. There's no gods dedicated to the Eiffel Tower. And that really, I guess, also, so symbolically, I mean, technologically, it signaled the age of tall buildings and skyscrapers, but culturally, it also, I guess, heralded the age of atheism. Although a lot of people still believe in gods, but the the progress of science and the relative marginalization of religions was really kind of, I mean, this monument really highlights that particular trend in human history. Not that religion is not powerful anymore; it's still pretty pervasive religion. But nobody believes that we need gods to build skyscrapers. We can do it ourselves. That's the advancement of science and technology. This here is the Statue of Liberty. I'm sure most people know this one. Located on an island outside New York in the United States. It is a statue of bronze skin on an iron frame erected in 1886 on Liberty Island off the coast of New York. If you're interested, the person who made the iron frame inside the statue was Mr. Eiffel himself, who also designed the Eiffel Tower. So the guy is pretty good with iron frame structures. He knows his iron frames. The statue was a gift from France, and it celebrates American independence and democracy, despite ongoing racial and gender inequalities at the time. When this statue was gifted to the United States, democratic governments were quite rare in the world. There was the French Republic, there was the American democracy, and there weren't that many other democracies around the world. So, they had to stick together. And for many years, immigrants arriving from Europe by boat would be greeted by the statue, which came to symbolize the American dream of, freedom and liberty. And again, we have this monument to an idea, not necessarily to a god, although it is liberty personified as a person. So in a way, you're making a god out of an idea, or you're making a personification of an idea, which is kind of what gods are. But it's not any traditional god, but a modern, personification of a very, well, I guess it's not a modern ideal, the idea of freedom. There were the ancient Greeks who really believed in self-determination. And I guess the Roman Republic, before it became an empire, was also quite interested in self-determination. But what I'm trying to say is that it's a monument to an idea, not necessarily a monument to a religion. There's no Church of Liberty. It's an idea. So again, there's this transition from the old monuments to gods to new monuments to ideas. And moving on to the old World Trade Center, as we see here, that was in New York, USA. The old Twin Towers in New York opened in 1973, was briefly the tallest buildings in the world, and they dominated the New York skyline, I guess along with Chrysler Building and the Empire State Building. But they really dominated the New York skyline until they were destroyed on September the 11th, 2001, in a terrorist attack. Or some people don't believe it was a terrorist attack, but let's just go with the most commonly accepted story for now. And I mean, they weren't originally considered monuments, given that they were basically office buildings. I mean, they were certainly big, but we don't really consider skyscrapers as monuments because they don't have a special meaning until they got destroyed. Once they got destroyed, suddenly they became symbols of American power and also symbols of the resistance against American imperialism, depending on how you want to look at it. And a new World Trade Center has been built. I don't know if they've quite finished it yet, but they're going to finish pretty soon if they haven't. And the new World Trade Center on the same site carries on the symbolism. It's called the Freedom Tower, I believe. So it went from just kind of trade, which is money, to Freedom Tower. So because they got destroyed, the site and the new tower became monuments to American power. So they weren't originally monuments, but now they are. They definitely are now because the meaning was imbued into them by the events of September 11th, which is the most interesting thing, I think. That something that wasn't originally monuments can become monuments because of things that happen. Very, very obviously, a very important event in human history, and with far-reaching consequences. Not all of them good. In fact, a lot of them bad. But there you go. So we're gonna end our little tour there. Exercise 10 is for you to build your own monument. The instructions are for you to construct a monument of your choice and design to the rear of the city. A site has been roughly marked out, but you are free to locate your monument anywhere you choose. You are to consider this your final exam. You are also to integrate the monument with the transitional space from exercise 9.2, and in fact, you should probably design both together because they're meant to work together. Note that the scope of this exercise is far larger than the previous exercises. Be realistic in your estimation of how much time this will take to build, and be careful not to be over-ambitious. Bigger is not necessarily better. Although you want it to be big enough to be impressive, you don't want it to be so big that it actually takes you several years to finish. That would be silly. So if you've been watching the other videos, you'll know that I've already chosen to build, to basically copy the Eiffel Tower, and that I've already built the base for the monument as my exercise 9. So in the next video, I'll continue with that and start building the tower itself. The exercise 9 and 10 really should be built together, and you really need to think about both of them together. I split them into 2 exercises just to kind of give you guys more time to work on this massive project. But, well, there you go. Alright, so there's the image licenses, and I'll see you in the next video where I will start just copying the Eiffel Tower. You can, oh, before I finish, copying is not necessarily bad. Let me just say that here. You can learn a lot by copying things. Basically, you copy something, you learn how the other person did it. So if I copy the Eiffel Tower, I learn a lot about the Eiffel Tower because I have to look very carefully at the original and then try to do it myself. And in doing so, I learn how it's done. What people kind of criticize about copying is if you try to pretend that it's your work. So if I build the Eiffel Tower and I say, hey, I designed this myself, I will be lying because obviously it's a copy of the Eiffel Tower. But if I say, hey, I copied the Eiffel Tower so I can learn about it, that's perfectly fine. That's perfectly fine as long as you don't try to pretend that it's your work. You are free to copy people as long as you're clear that it's not yours and you don't try to sell it as your own work. But you kind of reference the original and say, hey, it's a copy of the original and I'm doing this for the sake of learning or just for the sake of entertainment, then that's fine. So there's nothing wrong with copying, and in fact there's a lot of things you can gain from copying because you learn about how the other person did it. Just don't try to pass it off as your own work, that's all. Alright, I'll see you guys in the next video.